Scattered like emeralds across the vast blue expanse of the Indian Ocean, the Seychelles archipelago often appears as nothing more than a footnote on world maps. It's a place synonymous with idyllic beaches, swaying palms, and luxurious honeymoons. But beneath this veneer of tranquil paradise lies a story of incredible resilience, cunning, and survival. These islands, seemingly remote and insignificant, were once a strategic chessboard for the great European empires. While France and Britain clashed for global dominance, this tiny nation learned to navigate the treacherous currents of colonial ambition. It played a quiet but clever game, absorbing influences, forging its own identity, and ultimately outsmarting the very powers that sought to control it. The story of Seychelles is not just about its stunning beauty, it's a powerful lesson in how the small can endure, adapt, and thrive against the odds. What is remarkable is that for most of human history, these islands were completely untouched. Imagine that. While great civilizations rose and fell across the continents, Seychelles remained a silent sanctuary, a world without people. Its granite peaks and lush forests were home only to unique species of birds, giant tortoises, and plants found nowhere else on Earth. There were no footprints on its pristine sands, no settlements carved into its jungles. This isolation preserved a unique ecosystem, a kind of real-life Garden of Eden. It was a blank slate waiting for history to be written upon it. This long period of solitude makes its subsequent story all the more extraordinary, as it was thrust from complete obscurity into the very center of imperial rivalry in a relatively short space of time. The first whispers of its existence came from Arab traders who navigated the Indian Ocean centuries ago, possibly sighting the islands but never settling. They were mariners and merchants, their eyes fixed on the richer prizes of India and Africa. The Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama is credited with the first European sighting in the early 16th century, yet he too sailed on, his mission for spices and trade routes far more pressing than claiming these remote, uninhabited rocks. For over 200 years more, the islands remained a hideout for pirates, a temporary refuge for those fleeing the law, but not a home. They were a secret whispered among sailors, a mysterious and unclaimed jewel in the middle of a vast ocean, its true value yet to be discovered by the competing powers of Europe. This long period of being overlooked was, in a way, a blessing. It allowed the islands to remain pristine, a biological treasure chest. But the age of discovery and empire building was relentless. It was only a matter of time before the strategic importance of Seychelles, located on the vital sea route to India, would be recognized. The French were the first to see the potential, not for what the islands had, but for where they were. They were a perfect stopover point, a place to resupply ships and establish a presence in a region dominated by British naval power. And so, in the mid-18th century, the silence was finally broken. The first chapter of human history in Seychelles was about to begin, and it would be a story of struggle, adaptation, and the forging of a new people in the crucible of empire. The year 1756 marked a pivotal moment for the uninhabited archipelago. A French naval expedition led by Captain Corneille Nicolas Morphy formally claimed the islands for the French crown. He laid a stone of possession on the main island of Mahé, naming it and the archipelago after Jean Moreau de Seychelles, the finance minister to King Louis XV. The French weren't interested in mass colonization at first. Their goal was strategic. They saw the islands as a crucial outpost for their ships sailing to and from their colonies in India and Mauritius. They began to establish small settlements, bringing with them a small group of French colonists, but more significantly, they brought enslaved Africans. These individuals were forced to cultivate spices like cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, turning this untouched paradise into a plantation economy built on forced labor. The early French period was a struggle. Life was hard, supplies were scarce, and the small community was isolated. Yet, they laid the foundations of a permanent settlement. They introduced new plants, established gardens, and began to shape the landscape to suit their needs. The arrival of enslaved people from various parts of Africa and Madagascar was a dark chapter, but it was also the beginning of the island's unique cultural blend. These individuals brought with them their own traditions, languages, and beliefs, which began to mix with the culture of the French settlers. It was a forced and often brutal mixing, but from it, the seeds of a new Seychellois identity were sown. The French language spoken by the colonists slowly started to meld with the diverse African languages, creating the first hints of a new Creole tongue. The winds of change blew fiercely during the Napoleonic Wars. the strategic value of Seychelles did not go unnoticed by Britain, France's great rival. With control of the Indian Ocean at stake, the British Navy began to challenge French dominance in the region. The small French garrison on Mahé was no match for the might of the Royal Navy. After a series of skirmishes and blockades, the islands capitulated to the British in 1794. However, the French administrator, Jean-Baptiste Coe de Quincy, was a master of diplomacy. He skillfully negotiated a surrender that allowed the French settlers to retain their property and customs, cleverly raising the French flag whenever French ships appeared, and the British flag when the Royal Navy was in port. This pragmatism ensured the islands were spared the destruction of war. Despite this clever maneuvering, British control was formalized after Napoleon's defeat. The 1814 Treaty of Paris ceded Seychelles, along with Mauritius, to Great Britain. For nearly a century, Seychelles was administered as a dependency of Mauritius, another layer of colonial rule added to its history. The British abolished slavery in 1835, a momentous event that changed the social fabric of the islands forever. Freed Africans established their own communities, becoming fishermen and farmers, and their culture began to flourish more openly. The British presence also brought new influences, including English law, administration, and eventually Indian and Chinese merchants who came seeking economic opportunities. The islands were now a crown colony in the making, a multicultural society forged by the ambitions of two competing European empires. The end of slavery was a turning point. It didn't erase the injustices of the past, but it allowed for the creation of a truly unique society. With the French colonists, the now liberated Africans, and the later arrival of Indian and Chinese traders, Seychelles became a melting pot of cultures. Each group brought its own customs, cuisine, music, and traditions, and over time these elements began to fuse together. This wasn't a process of one culture dominating another, but rather a blending that created something entirely new. The Seychellois people, or Seychellois Creole people as they are known, emerged from this fusion. Their identity was not solely African, French, Indian, or Chinese, but a rich tapestry woven from all these threads. It was a remarkable social experiment, born not out of a grand design, but out of the everyday interactions of people from different corners of the world. At the heart of this new identity was the development of the Creole language, or Creole Seychellois. It began as a pidgin language, a simplified form of communication between the French masters and the enslaved Africans, but it quickly evolved into a rich and complex language in its own right. It took the basic vocabulary of French and combined it with the grammatical structures and influences of various African languages, as well as incorporating words from Malagasy, English, and Indian languages. Creole became the language of the people, the lingua franca that united everyone, regardless of their origin or social standing. It was the language of the markets, the fishing boats, and the home. By speaking Creole, the people of Seychelles asserted a shared identity, distinct from their colonial rulers. This shared culture became a subtle but powerful form of resistance against colonial authority. While the British administration imposed its own laws, language, and systems, the Creole culture thrived beneath the surface. It was expressed through music, like the lively Sega and Mucha dances, which had their roots in the songs and rhythms of the enslaved Africans. These were more than just dances. They were expressions of joy, sorrow, and community spirit. The cuisine also reflected this fusion, blending French culinary techniques with the spices of India, the flavors of China, and the staple foods of Africa, like breadfruit and cassava. This vibrant local culture provided a sense of belonging and solidarity that the colonial administration could never fully penetrate or control. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, this cultural identity began to fuel a growing political consciousness. In 1903, Seychelles was finally separated from Mauritius and became a British crown colony, with its own governor and legislative council. However, power remained firmly in the hands of the British and a small elite of white landowners. The vast majority of the Creole population had no say in how they were governed. They were subjects, not citizens, but their shared language and culture had given them a sense of unity and nationhood. The ground was being prepared for a new kind of struggle, not for survival against the elements, but for political rights and ultimately for self-determination. The Creole nation was now ready to find its political voice. The early 20th century saw the first stirrings of political awakening in Seychelles. The islands were a crown colony, but, the system was deeply unequal. The governor held absolute power, and the Legislative Council was dominated by a small group of wealthy landowners, known as the Grands Blancs. The Creole majority, who worked the plantations, fished the seas, and ran the small shops, were excluded from the corridors of power. Education and healthcare were limited, and economic opportunities were honestly pretty scarce for most people. This sense of injustice began to simmer, and a new generation of Seychellois started to question the legitimacy of colonial rule. They saw the world changing around them, with independence movements gaining momentum across Africa and Asia, and they began to dream of a different future for their own islands. The Second World War had a profound impact on Seychelles. Many Seychellois men enlisted in the British Army and served overseas, where they were exposed to new ideas about freedom, democracy, and self-determination. They returned home with a broader perspective and a refusal to accept the old colonial order. At the same time, the war highlighted the strategic importance of the islands, and the British established a seaplane base. This brought more contact with the outside world and further accelerated social change. After the war, Britain, weakened and facing pressure to decolonize, began to introduce limited political reforms. The first political parties emerged, giving a formal voice to the growing desire for change and representation. The 1960s was the decade when the movement for self-determination truly took hold. Two main political parties were formed, shaping the political landscape for years to come. The Seychelles Democratic Party, or SDP, led by James Manchem, was more conservative. It favored close ties with Britain and a gradual path to self-governance, focusing on developing a tourism-based economy. In contrast, the Seychelles People's United Party, or SPIUP, led by the charismatic lawyer France Albert René, advocated for complete independence. René's party had a socialist platform, promising to address the deep-seated inequalities in Seychellois society and give power to the working-class Creole majority. The political debate was no longer about small reforms, but about the fundamental question of independence. These two parties represented two different visions for the future of Seychelles. Manchem and the SDP appealed to the business community and landowners, promising stability and prosperity through tourism and foreign investment. René and the SPUP, on the other hand, mobilized the masses with a message of social justice, equality, and national sovereignty. The rivalry between them was intense, but it was also a sign of a maturing political consciousness. The people of Seychelles were no longer passive subjects of a distant empire. They were actively engaged in a debate about their own destiny. The stage was set for the final chapter of colonial rule and the dawn of a new, independent nation. The question was not if Seychelles would be free, but what kind of nation it would become. After years of political campaigning and negotiations with the British government, the path to independence became clear. A constitutional conference was held in London, bringing together the leaders of both major parties, James Manchem and France Albert René. A compromise was reached. In 1975, Seychelles was granted self-governance, with Manchem becoming the first prime minister. A year later, on June 29, 1976, the British flag was lowered for the last time, and the new flag of an independent Seychelles was raised. The nation became a republic within the Commonwealth, and James Manchem was sworn in as its first president. France Albert René became the prime minister, forming a coalition government that brought together the two rival parties in a spirit of national unity. The air was filled with optimism. For the first time in its history, Seychelles was master of its own fate. The coalition government was meant to bridge the ideological divide between Manchem's pro-Western capitalist vision and René's socialist ambitions. Manchem focused on attracting foreign investment and building a luxury tourism industry, traveling extensively to promote the new nation on the world stage. He envisioned Seychelles as a millionaire's playground, a peaceful and prosperous haven. However, this approach was criticized by many within René's party, who felt that it did little to address the poverty and inequality that still affected the majority of the population. The coalition was fragile, and beneath the surface of national unity, political tensions were simmering. This tension came to a dramatic head just 1 year after independence. On June 5, 1977, while President Manchem was in London attending a Commonwealth conference, a group of armed supporters of René's party staged a swift and nearly bloodless coup d'état. They took control of the police stations and the radio station, declaring that they had overthrown a government that was leading the country towards corruption and neo-colonialism. France Albert René, who denied having planned the coup but quickly assumed leadership, was installed as the new president. The coup marked a dramatic shift in the country's political direction. The brief experiment with a multi-party coalition was over, and Seychelles was about to embark on a long and transformative period of one-party socialist rule. Under René's leadership, Seychelles was declared a one-party state, and his party, renamed the Seychelles People's Progressive Front, or SPPF, became the sole legal political organization. The new government implemented a sweeping socialist agenda aimed at creating a more egalitarian society. They nationalized key sectors of the economy and launched ambitious social programs. The government made massive investments in public education, healthcare, and housing, with the goal of providing free access to these essential services for all citizens. Literacy rates soared, life expectancy increased, and a comprehensive social security system was established. For many ordinary Seychellois, these reforms brought tangible improvements to their quality of life, fulfilling the promises of social justice that René had long championed. The era of one-party rule under President René brought significant social progress, but it also came at a cost. Political dissent was not tolerated, and the government maintained a tight grip on society. However, by the late 1980s and early 1990s, the global political landscape was changing dramatically. The Cold War was ending, and the collapse of the Soviet Union sent shockwaves across the world, discrediting the model of one-party socialist states. There was growing international pressure on Seychelles to democratize, coupled with increasing calls for political freedom from within the country itself. Responding to these pressures, President René announced in 1991 that Seychelles would begin a transition back to a multi-party system. It was a historic decision that would redefine the nation's future. The transition to democracy was peaceful and orderly. A new constitution was drafted and approved by a national referendum in 1993, guaranteeing fundamental rights and freedoms, and establishing the framework for multi-party elections. The first presidential and legislative elections under the new system were held that same year. France, Albert René and his SPPF party won a decisive victory, demonstrating that despite the authoritarian nature of his rule, his social policies remained popular with a large segment of the population. The return of multi-party politics, however, allowed for a more open and dynamic political debate, with opposition parties now able to challenge the government and hold it accountable. Seychelles had successfully navigated a difficult political transition without the conflict that plagued many other nations. With a stable democratic framework in place, Seychelles turned its focus to economic development. The government realized that the old state-controlled model was no longer sustainable. It began a process of economic liberalization, privatizing state-owned enterprises and actively encouraging foreign investment. The cornerstone of this new economic strategy was tourism, but with a crucial twist. Instead of just chasing mass-market tourism, Seychelles began to brand itself as an exclusive high-end destination focused on sustainability and ecotourism. The country leveraged its extraordinary natural beauty, its pristine beaches, unique flora and fauna, and protected marine parks, to attract discerning travelers willing to pay a premium for an unspoiled paradise. This strategy proved to be incredibly successful. The tourism boom transformed the Seychellois economy, bringing in much-needed foreign currency and creating thousands of jobs. Luxury resorts were built, but often with strict environmental regulations to minimize their impact on the delicate ecosystems. The government also diversified into other areas, such as developing a robust offshore financial services sector and promoting a sustainable fishing industry. The wealth generated from these sectors was reinvested into maintaining the country's high standards of public welfare, including free education and healthcare. Seychelles managed to create a successful model that combined a market-driven economy with a strong social safety net, resulting in one of the highest Human Development Index scores in Africa. It was a testament to the nation's ability to adapt and innovate. Today, on the 12th of June 2025, Seychelles stands as a beacon of stability and prosperity in the Indian Ocean. It is a nation that has successfully blended its diverse cultural heritage into a harmonious and unified society. The Creole spirit, born from a history of struggle and fusion, remains the vibrant heart of the nation. It is a place where political stability, forged through a challenging but ultimately peaceful journey to multi-party democracy, has created a secure environment for its people and for visitors. The stunning natural beauty of the islands continues to be its greatest asset, drawing people from all over the world who come to experience its unique and carefully preserved environment. Seychelles has proven that a small island nation can indeed carve out a successful and influential place for itself on the world stage. However, this island paradise faces significant challenges, many of which are shared by small island states globally. The most pressing of these is climate change. Rising sea levels pose an existential threat to low-lying coastal areas, while warming ocean temperatures threaten the fragile coral reefs that are the foundation of the marine ecosystem and a key attraction for tourists. The nation's economy is also heavily dependent on tourism, making it vulnerable to global economic downturns, health crises, or shifts in travel trends. Balancing the need for economic growth with the imperative to protect its natural environment is a constant and delicate dance. The government and the people of Seychelles are acutely aware that the very resources that make their country so special are also incredibly fragile. In response to these threats, Seychelles has emerged as a global leader in environmental conservation and the concept of the blue economy. The government has taken bold and innovative steps to protect its natural heritage. It has designated over 30% of its vast ocean territory as a protected marine area, safeguarding it from unregulated fishing and exploitation. In a pioneering move, the country engaged in a debt-for-nature swap, a financial deal that allowed it to restructure its national debt in exchange for committing to further marine conservation efforts. This forward-thinking approach demonstrates a deep understanding that the nation's long-term economic security is inextricably linked to the health of its environment. Seychelles is not just protecting its beauty, it is investing in its future. The story of Seychelles offers a powerful lesson in resilience and self-determination. From an uninhabited archipelago to a pawn in the games of empires, it has navigated a complex history to emerge as a proud, independent, and sovereign nation. It has faced colonization, a coup, and one-party rule, yet has transitioned peacefully to a stable democracy. It has built a unique and inclusive Creole culture that unites its people. Today, as it confronts the modern challenges of climate change and economic vulnerability, it does so with the same spirit of innovation and pragmatism that has defined its past. Seychelles is more than just a beautiful destination. It is a testament to the idea that even the smallest of nations can shape their own destiny and become powerful guardians of our planet.